Hi, this is Tom again, and welcome to part 2 of my incredibly long video about gawking at green coffee, where we're going to be looking at this tray of more strange, interesting, and exciting samples that I've pulled over the years. And this is incredibly long. I think you should get an award if you make it all the way through this video. So you can see I've literally aged since I started making it. So anyway, let's look at these coffees and talk about them a bit. Let's look at this tray of coffee that I collected. I put this together in during the pandemic and then finally finished labeling it last week. So that was late in the pandemic. So it was 2 years. Good job, Thompson. And this has some coffee that's not totally green coffee. It has some Parchment Coffee. We have some over here and here. We have some honey coffees. We have some Robusta. Those are some of the highlights here. And we have some commercial grades. And let's take a look at this and see what we see. And of course, this is not a technical thing, and something I'm saying here is going to be wrong. And if you catch it, let me know. If this is embedded on our library page, there's going to be comments, and I'll answer your comments. So if there's something I've said that's inconsistent, that is confusing, that is problematic, that is just flat out wrong, let me know. I'd love to know. So these are natural coffees from Peru. These first three, these are actually the same lot, these two. And this one is lot number 2. You can see it's a little bit mixy. And you see this extreme yellow staining in it. Now, when I started in coffee, I was taught that these were just flat out defects. These are called sours. On the coffee grading chart and form, there's a category for sours. And especially in particular, I've showed you the naturals in part 1 there, where you have silver skin on, and you'll see some here, I believe, that you can see the layer of silver skin, which will come off as chaff there. And that's sort of typically where in naturals you get this sort of yellowish color. But the yellowish color here is not from that. It's from the coffee seed itself being sort of stained yellow. That's a typical look of a sour, and in the cup, it's very sour. That was considered a defect. Now, at these times, with anaerobics and stuff, there's a huge higher capacity for sourness. I don't know, maybe it's because people drink IPAs all the time and stuff. And sour coffee has started to not be such a problem. There's younger buyers who think that is a good thing. That's very interesting, very, very, very fruity. For me, I'm mixed, and this was coffee we rejected because for me, this coffee had vinegar flavor in it. It was a sour ferment that goes beyond anything I could call winey fruit, ripe fruit. It was vinegar, and I don't want vinegar in my coffee. These are coffees that you taste and you go, oh, that's interesting, but you don't, do you want a full cup? No, you don't. So as a buyer, I have this sort of bias. I'm old, grumpy, and I like coffee that tastes like coffee. If I wanted some vinegar in my coffee, I just put vinegar in it. And, if you like that, you got to know that I'm screening that out sometimes within a certain degree. We definitely are doing some fruity coffees. We've definitely expanded more, along with an anaerobic trend and stuff, into things that we feel, hey, I would actually drink that coffee. But it's, you just can't feel good about buying a coffee that you wouldn't actually drink yourself. And that's where some of these went, and that's why they were rejected. And other lots in the same container, other naturals, we accepted. They were quite good. Now we're going to get into some interesting commercial grades on the next few. These are Kenya undergrades. These are things I collected from samples that were being auctioned. What I think is really interesting to note is not like bad coffee comes from this other place where there's like bad coffee farmers and a bad coffee mill. This is from one of the best mills in Kenya, Kangocho. But every coffee that goes through processing, to make good coffee, you have to remove the bad coffee. And this is the bad coffee. So this one is called UG2, UG3, undergrades. UG means undergrades. And this is the light undergrades. And next to it, we have the UG heavy undergrades. So these are everything removed in the mill, removed by the sorter. I'm just wondering if we can get, like with these sours, things that were formerly defects to be sort of appraised positively and people pay extra for it. Maybe we can do the same with something like this. Now these are like the infamous black beans. These are stinker beans. And they produce usually a kind of nasty phenolic flavor in the cup. Well, where does this coffee go? I mean, every coffee bean that's produced is sold. It goes somewhere. And this coffee tends to go to instant coffee. It also goes to very low-level commercial coffee. There's another grade, which is bits and pieces, very similar to this, called grinders. And grinders is simply sold for coffee that no one will ever see. It's roasted and ground and sold as commercial coffee. Now here's a Kenya grade that's not so bad, actually. It can be quite good. And these are E-grade. E-grade are, I guess for Kenya it's appropriate, called elephant beans. These are particularly good elephant beans, but they're kind of large. A lot of times accompanying an elephant bean. It's not the case where the coffee bean one fails totally and it produces the pea berry. It produces a very small, like disc shape. So there is a kind of failure, and the bean that survives grows out into this unusual form. But a lot of times the bean is fractured, and you can kind of see in this one, I'm trying to manipulate it, this kind of unusual fracture in it, and you'll see them in some others here too. So those are E-grade, and they actually can be kind of good in the cup. But it's not something we offer normally. And I have to say, at this, just off the top of my head, I'm not sure why this anomaly exists more in Kenya in particular. Maybe I can add that in the comments. After our E-grade, this is a natural from Kenya. Another thing that's a trend, we just selected and bought a natural yesterday, but a lot of Kenyan naturals are not what you think. They're not like high quality naturals. The naturals were like when a coffee farm has sold all the coffee, they're basically their local co-op shuts down. They're left with some coffee on the tree. They pick it, and it's called Mbuni. It's Mbuni. And Mbuni coffee is oftentimes sold in the local market or sold as commercial coffee because it's not especially well picked, selected, dried. It can get wet with the rains as it dries, and it's not treated well. But I was always curious because you get some really nice aspects in the cup of Mbuni when you taste it. You'll get a lot of defect cups, but there's some good flavor. So finally, people have tried to do Mbuni, a natural coffee, intentionally in Kenya, and it's been a little mixed with the results. I've actually rejected quite a lot of them, but we just had one this week that I was in Kenya, and it was really nice. Last week I was in Kenya, and so we'll be seeing that soon. Kangunyu. Now, this is another kind of anomaly from Africa. This is called home processed coffee. This one is from Burundi. You would see this a lot in Rwanda. The governments fought a lot against, they wanted to basically prohibit and ban people from processing their own coffee at home. And that sounds terrible, right? And it's odd because in places like Colombia, a lot of the most fantastic coffees from small farms, family farms, is all home processed coffee, and they produce these world-class coffees. Traditionally in Burundi and Rwanda, perhaps because of the selection of cherry, like the Mbuni next door here, it was actually low-grade commercial. And the problem is that the coffee didn't sell for much, didn't make much money for the farmer, didn't make much money, probably more importantly, for the country, for the politicians. It didn't yield 4x foreign exchange dollars to the country because it didn't sell for a high value. And so home processing was basically outlawed in favor of people delivering coffee to a central wet mill, walk a kilometer perhaps or not, and you could sell your coffee directly to a wet mill and get a better price. But I don't know if that's good or bad. I'm just saying that existed, and there's a history of home processing. This, of course, these are the moon beans. This is India Monsooned. And I'm going to show you some Parchment coffee, and it's important to see the difference that this is the actual coffee bean. This isn't an outer layer, as you'll see in Parchment. And Monsooned coffee, as you might know, traditionally there was coffee in warehouses. The monsoon season would come, the humidity would go crazy. The coffee would, coffee after it's dried, this is like a sponge. So if you put water here and you come back in the morning, it's all the water's gone and the coffee's huge. It sops up moisture, but that produced a kind of flavor that people liked. We still offer, a blend and Monsooned coffee, which actually our current lot is super nice. We were brewing it and drinking it last week, and I really enjoyed it. And it's out there. A lot of the younger companies and stuff don't do stuff like this, but people have a very narrow view of coffee when you think about tea and all the different types of tea. There not being a singular great tea. And, flavor in coffee is not legitimate and illegitimate. It's just different. So, I enjoy sort of trying to offer a variety of differences in coffee. And one of them is Monsooned, which can be kind of nasty, but when you select a good lot, it can be nice coffee. And it produces a lot of crema and espresso. So that's one reason we like it. Okay, this one is really interesting. This is one coffee sample from a place, unfortunately, I've never gone. It's from a customer who came in and was like, hey, I went to Cuba and I was in a small village and I bought the coffee. And what do you think? And I was like, oh my God. Because you can see by the color, this is supposed to be green coffee. And I'm not even sure the processing. I wish I had some nice coffee from Cuba, but this is what they're drinking locally in Cuba. And I was very curious and to taste it. And it was really not very good. But it was a great experience, and I appreciate someone bringing that in. What I thought was very strange, and I'm going to show you this in a little bit, is that I didn't know they grow Robusta in Cuba, and I will swear that this is Robusta. And I'll show you how you tell Robusta from Arabica. Let's look at this bean here. Okay, well, I'll jump ahead and tell you how. Do you see this incredibly straight crease in it? There's something too about the shape of Robusta. It tends to have a little bit more curvature on the side edges. This one doesn't, but see that straight line. Now let's just look at the Arabica next door. And this Arabica is a Kenya C grade. This is a lower grade Kenya, a smaller bean, which sometimes they can be good. But you see, for example, here, that's very typical of Arabica, is this sort of slight curve to the crease. It's very rare to see. I mean, this one is fairly straight, I understand. But there's some difference here. If you can see it, I can see it. And this one, maybe looks a little more like a Robusta. So I think this Cuban coffee was actually a blend of Arabica and Robusta. And even this one that it's got this pointed shape, it's typical to Robusta. Could be something else, could be Liberica, That has a kind of Liberica look to it. That has a bit of Arabica look. Anyway, really interesting, and I appreciate it. See, next up is T grade. I'm gonna have to put in captions what T grade means, but this is a defective Kenya low grade. Again, this one is from Kangocho, so a very nice coffee, very nice farm that produces world-class coffee, but this is the off grades that they also produce at the same time. It's kind of interesting here that I see coffee in here that is withered. And so that's why it was probably removed by the machines. Withered coffee is sort of, you know, when you have drought. This one here especially, this is withered. It's like a dried pea. Do you see that on the side? Ah, I lost it. You know, I'm using the end from a thermometer here. So I was using a zip tie previously, but I accidentally recorded that whole video vertical, and I'm redoing it. So let's look at some parchment coffee. And I'm going to jump around a little because parchment is the intermediate stage when you are producing either honey coffee or wet processed coffee or some other processes. And let's skip over here because this is the wet processed parchment. You see the whitish appearance. And if I can grab this and essentially, so I was doing a lot of gardening this weekend, so you know. So you can see why it's called parchment, is this layer that's sort of crisp, and it's like a thick parchment, like parchment you write on with your ye olde ink pen. And so that surrounds the coffee. As it dries, the coffee bean shrinks inside of the parchment layer, and then it becomes easier to separate when it goes to dry milling, where it gets grated. And this coffee is a traditional fermented, so it has this very white appearance because you've taken off the fruit layer that sticks to the coffee. I go over this in our honey article and video very extensively, ad nauseum. But when you choose to pulp the skin off of the coffee cherry and leave all the fruit on, you think of the way certain types of stone fruit where you eat it down to the pit and then you have this fruit that will not separate off of the seed. That's coffee. So either ferment it off, you machine, you force it off, or you just say, hey, I'm just going to dry it, and that's honey coffee. And there's different types of honey coffee. I think you'll see here, this is a very red color, and that's because they've left a lot of the fruit on. This one is a little more yellow, and it's probably because, you know, with some machines you can use water and pressure control to remove less of the fruity mucilage and get a different style, more of a washed, wet process taste from that. And this is a Costa Rica yellow honey parchment coffee right here. And so, you know, the reason a honey coffee tastes different is because as coffee dries, it's exchanging with the environment around it. If that environment has a fruit layer, that is one of the compounds that's going to be exchanging. It's sort of very simplified, and I'm sure sort of not entirely what's going on, but it's part of the sort of bonding of water, which is an ion. It's charged and it bonds with what's around it. So, you know, if you dry your coffee with onions, it will taste like onions, unfortunately. And let's keep going here. This I don't want. This is some weird Sulawesi aged washed. Somebody, no offense, but somebody marketed this as woolly rhino, and I was just like, yeah, I'm not gonna sell woolly rhino. These are samples I collected in Indonesia and Sumatra from wet hulling, and you know, unfortunately, wet hulling produces a lot of defects. These are all the defects from that they were sorting out by hand visually at a mill. I don't know if this was Lintong. no, I don't have the information. But yeah, but this is, sort of part of having good coffee is taking all the bad coffee out of it. And, even nice coffee has defects. This is a higher level, but these are also defects. You see different type of nipping of the bean, perhaps from the machines, maybe from the plant. You see partial beans, these hollow types, black beans, of course, that need to come out. And all of this is part of creating a nice cup. And a lot of this labor is done by people, by hand, certain amount by machine, and other part by hand. So it's really goes to a point that, people like to talk about this coffee is from this altitude, it's this cultivar, it's this, sort of different aspects that create good coffee. But to me, the biggest thing that creates great coffee is the labor, the work behind it. We have to see that work when we look at coffee. Even in ways like this, we need to see the labor that's put into it. This is a low-grade Vietnam coffee. There's a lot of effort now to try to produce higher quality coffee from certain Asian origins that they don't have great altitude, but they're working really hard with varieties and shade and different techniques to sort of get higher quality, because you don't get the same bean density from a lot of warmer, lower climates where you grow Arabica coffee. It matures very quickly, sort of get a large bean without a lot of density to it. And density is really important not only for taste quality, but for roasting. Denser coffee roasts better, in my opinion. And they're challenging this and trying to do their best, so that's great. And this coffee, it's kind of yellow looking. I wouldn't say the Vietnam next to it is especially green, but this one is kind of yellow. And why is that? It's old. It's old coffee. It's from 2017. So even like our coffee's 100% imported and stored in hermetic bags to prevent loss of moisture and loss of quality, but we also sell coffee very quickly here. We move through our stock rapidly in order to stay with the current harvest. And what happens when you have coffee that gets old, if you found some in the bottom of your drawer or something, is it degrades. It just ages like any plant specimen, part of a plant. And it's important to remember that coffee is created to be a durable product. You think of your beans in your cupboard. It's made to last some time, and yet eventually it degrades. So I don't want to think about coffee as focusing on freshness in this way that you focus on peaches and cherries in the season. That would be wrong. But it's also not, it does degrade and age. And when it does, if it's been stored in a jute bag directly, it gets jute flavor, this burlap flavor. And when it's stored in plastic or a high density bag, even like our hermetic bags, Ecotect that we use, it creates a cardboard flavor. Like it's as if you steeped extra paper in, or you didn't wash the filter out. You just taste a pulpy paper, and it's generally not that pleasant. So that's old coffee, and hopefully you'll never see that in a washed Arabica from Sweet Maria's. But there's a lot of people that have a lot of old coffee that they need to sell. So this is another Vietnam. This is a grade 1 screen 16. This was supposed to be good quality, as you can see from some defects. I mean, again, we go by the cup, but it's always interesting after you cut blind to go look at the coffee samples, and you'll see that it has some issues there. So does Sumatra, and sometimes it's just good. So, I sort of take this, take even my own opinions a bit in a circumspect way. And what is this? It sure looks like a Robusta. Yeah, I was looking backwards at my little list of the order here. Like, this is not Rwanda. That is a Robusta from Vietnam. And so, you know, a lot of the effort to get better quality from Asia is get a better price to farmers, because Vietnam farmers were just producing huge volumes of coffee, Vietnam Robusta, and getting very low prices for it on a mass scale. And I don't think that really worked for anybody but the traders who were making money off of it. Again, here's a great comparison of Arabica and Robusta side by side. So you can see here the sort of curve in some of the beans, the kind of irregularity of the crease, and something, you know, a lot more straight and regular. This one's a little odd. Here's a little pea berry. Oh, yeah, it is. But Robusta is another pea berry. Robusta tends to have this with a slightly pointed shape. Some of this looks quite old, like it's turned whitish. I don't have a crop year on it. That's Robusta. We're going to skip over our methylene chloride decaf, which we talked about. Boo, methylene chloride. And let's go to Laos coffee. So this is this one's from 2022. We actually did buy this coffee and offered it. It's kind of a basic cup, but there's a lot of interest in it. And it was nice. It's not going to be like, you know, Ethiopian Kenya in the cup, but very enjoyable drinking coffee. And we're hoping to carry that again this year. You can see we've got another Robusta coming up. Maybe you're getting good at this and you can see that right away too, with this bean here. And this one is Karnatika, Indian Cherry Robusta. That's actually quite old, 2017. Now, Cherry Robusta means a natural coffee, and you can kind of see that there's a lot of silver skin still attached to this. It doesn't have that reddish color that some of the Arabicas has, but you can see, and that's going to produce a lot of chaff. It's very nice for espresso if it's well processed, well prepared, without too many defects. Now we're getting into some of those honeys again, and this one is kind of interesting because I didn't know this either. If you look at the Robusta and that straightish line, like for example this sort of pointed shape. I mean, that one has a little curve, but there's kind of, in total, there's a sort of, and actually you see that in the parchment too on a Robusta. You see this kind of straight shape line. And look at this one. You've got the same pointy thing and this straight crease. So it's interesting how that transfers through. And of course, that's because coffee isn't grown, the coffee plant isn't growing coffee for us to roast and drink. It's growing coffee to make seeds and reproduce, like plants want to do. If they want. Maybe pushing it there. And this was our sort of dark honey. Generally, this has been dried with a lot of the fruit on it, so that's a honey Arabica coffee. Where is that one from? That is Panama red honey parchment. Not sure when I collected that. And then our very clean looking, probably clean tasting Rwanda. And then India Monsooned. So I've done it. I talked again for 30 minutes. I'm tired. I can't believe you stayed with me on this. Thank you very much for doing this little coffee gawk session with me. And if you didn't learn anything, at least you learned that what we call green coffee can look like many different things. And while I don't, concretely draw conclusions from looking at green coffee, it is kind of interesting and there's things to talk about with it. And it is still useful to know how to look at green coffee and to some degree decide, make some decisions about it. Even if that's not, should I buy it or should I not, or is it good or is it not? It's not that simple, but there's some clues, and it's good to pay attention to those clues. Thanks a lot.